This is H2Oquirrh, a vision for Salt Lake County's Southwest Waterways. We have three presenters with us today. Helen is a landscape designer and planner with Design Workshop. Renn is an environmental engineer with LimnoTech. And Jason is the Canyons Management Program Director with Salt Lake County Office of Regional Development. Give them a round of applause, and thank you for being here.
Great, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm Jason Wolf, and we're here to talk about the H2Oquirrh Vision. So this vision aims to safeguard and look at the long-term enhancement of the waterways in the southwest region of Salt Lake County. So the vision focuses on natural and urban water corridors with headwaters in the Oquirrh and Traverse Mountains. These creeks, washes include Bingham, Midas, Rose, Butterfield, Barneys, Copper, Juniper, Beef Hollow, and Wood Hollow. So this project is focused on the collaboration with our community and the local municipalities to improve the environment and community connection to these spaces. I wanted to take the time and thank our project partners, Wasatch Front Regional Council, Bluffdale, Copperton, Harriman, Riverton, and West Jordan, and also Helen with Design Workshop and Renn, who are here today from LimnoTech. So this plan serves as a crucial step in the path toward balancing the diverse needs of the community while safeguarding the ecological integrity for these invaluable resources. For those of you who attended our presentation at the previous symposium where we discussed the existing conditions, this presentation today builds on that discussion, as we'll be sharing some of the results that we found and what we heard from the community. Along with that, we want to talk to everyone here today and show you how we can continue that conversation and how you can be a part of this vision going forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. So moving into the beef of the presentation here. First, we're going to go through a brief overview of the project context, an overview of our research into the existing conditions, then start to outline the goals of the plan, which is starting to get into that new stuff if you were here last year that we've worked on over the last year. Then with strategies and actions, get into how does this plan actually get implemented, and finally looking forward to what's next, as Jason had mentioned. So looking into this area, again, we're in the southwest part of Salt Lake County, so you're seeing Point of the Mountain at the bottom there, and the Oquirrhs wrapping up around the left side of those images. This is an area of extreme rapid growth and is the fastest growing area in Utah. From 1990 to 2020, through these images, you can see how back in 1990, there's a lot of farmland. In 2000, you start to see the footprint of Bangor Highway come through. In 2010, a lot more development. You can even start to see Daybreak pop up right there. And then finally, in our most recent image here in 2020, really just seeing that development fill in. And what that is significant for is our waterways. There are a lot of different conditions that we're seeing today of these waterways. Some of them run through parks. Some are sort of this undeveloped land like Bingham Creek there. Our canals are more of a human-made condition. We have some where we're already starting to manage stormwater and erosion, like Rose Creek at the bottom there. Juniper Canyon Creek shows this really great juxtaposition of development with the waterways. And then also just looking for ways to connect with and cross this water and bring people closer to it. So to manage the challenges of this urban development with the resource that is these waterways, that brings us to the H2Oquirrh Vision. And to address these challenges, the project team developed 5 goals that work with 6 municipalities that really are a balance of sustainable development and environmental stewardship. This is just a teaser of a lot of what we're going to talk about later in this presentation. But with these 5 different goals that you're seeing the icons pop up for, really what we're looking at is first, protecting water, second, enhancing the natural and built environments, and third, connecting people to these waterways. But more on that later. Diving into a little bit of background, just that we're all kind of on the same page about what we're up against here. This is a map of sort of the hydrology conditions that we're investigating. Of course, we have the 9 creeks and washes, like Jason named, from Beef Hollow at the south end to Barney's Wash up at the north end. This is skewed with north to the right there. And also all the canals in the area. All of these feed into the Jordan River, which then feeds into Great Salt Lake. So really this plan is significant from a how do we deal with this hydrology and what's upstream feeds into these downstream issues we've been discussing all day. Even more, we look at the land cover data and we see that most of this area, 39%, is currently urban development. What that means is a lot of this is paved or built with houses, and that has major implications for the watershed. Only 1% of this area is currently wetlands, and less than half of the area is natural areas and open space, with a lot of risk of that shrinking even further. With that, I will pass it over to Renn to discuss some more of these nuances of the hydrology.
Thanks, Helen. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. So this is an interesting area. Looking at the aquifer recharge areas, the green area is the bedrock recharge. That's the mountains and Kennecott copper mines, this big hole in the middle. This is a secondary, or the primary recharge area in light yellow, and then the brown is the secondary recharge area. And these streams are on the east-facing slopes of the mountains, and so most of when the storms come along, the storms come from the west, and so most of the snow falls on the east side. And so when the clouds come across the mountains, they drop less on these east-facing slopes, and so there's less water available for the streams. And then most of this watershed is in the recharge area, and so the little bit of water that makes it into the stream or into the watershed either evaporates or infiltrates. And so that leads to most of these streams, especially in the valley, are usually dry. There usually isn't water in them. Rose Creek, I found out last year from folks that, and in our workshops, that it does flow perennially year-round a little bit, but at the mouth of the canyon, it's diverted for other uses, so none of that water makes it down further. I don't know how much further it would make it in these recharge areas, but yeah, there isn't a whole lot of water. So we were thinking about what's the significance of water in this watershed, and where is the water, and why is that water important? And we thought that, you know, with these large recharge areas that are here, the water that's the most important in this basin is the groundwater. Like I said, most of the water would come down, infiltrate, go into the ground. And I know that the state has been working towards LID regulations requiring folks that do new developments to implement LID. And LID is when you develop a subdivision or a store or something, you put the stormwater in the ground at the place where it's produced and don't put it into traditional stormwater, because usually that's more expensive to treat. It does make it to the Jordan River faster, but it doesn't have the advantage of recharging your aquifer, cleaning up the water as it goes through the aquifer, and it slows down the water quite a bit. So you'll have the water for the future if you need it. Well, it's making its way to the Great Salt Lake. If you need it during a drought time, then it's available there. So we thought that, you know, the groundwater is the most important part of this story, and eventually it will come down and come up in the discharge area and into the Jordan River and down to the Great Salt Lake. You will lose a little in the discharge area. Plants take it up, and other things. The water is closer to the surface there, so you will lose some there. But overall, we thought getting the water into the ground is the most important thing in this system. So pass it back to Helen.
All right, thank you, Renn. So just for a little bit of an additional context, of course, water and our recharge being the most important issue of this plan, but that wouldn't be complete without some additional context of our sort of human and natural systems. We've also mapped all of the parks and open spaces in this area. We're looking, again, having the Jordan River kind of running through the bottom edge of this study area is a great precedent for how parks and open space can serve both people and the environment. So looking into that. And this is a pretty great network of parks, but you do start to see a few gaps in here where these kind of grayish green areas are a quarter-mile walking radius off of these parks. And sort of best practices try to fill those in as much as possible, but we've got some great stuff going, especially in some of these areas around here. We also looked into cultural assets. What areas in Salt Lake County are important to people? Where are the people and where do they gather? And this is significant for when we try to implement particularly educational programming. Knowing where people are and where the highest impact can be found is really critical to this. We also looked at, there's 22 WFRC equity focus areas in this area, which are the sort of salmon colored tracks there, looking at their methodology, which is a data set that you can pull, sort of as priority areas of where is this infrastructure maybe going to have the most impact. Then also the Wasatch Choice 2050 centers, of which there are 32 in the study area. So it's kind of those big development and important drivers of development into the future. And of course, the flora and fauna type stakeholders of this study. These are just a few key species that have public data sets for mapping. But we've also looked into what are our endangered and threatened species in the area to just be cognizant of all of the players here in making sure that the habitats are preserved for these waterways and for the animals, not just making this about people only. Another big update compared to last year was that we've done a lot of community engagement. And these are just a couple of graphs that came out of our public survey from earlier this year. And the really neat findings, particularly about these two questions that were asked, is that we're seeing a consistent preference for preservation, habitat restoration, and recreation at the top of these surveys. So we loved seeing that not only is this a best practice that we want to see the environment uplifted through this plan, but the public is also rooting for that. Additionally, the public did point out that something needs to be done. No improvements needed was a very unpopular choice here. So everybody is kind of pointing towards that. Let's do something together to make these waterways even better. We also had a really amazing team, a steering committee, and that included municipal partners from the 6 different municipalities in this area. So we worked a lot with Bluffdale, West Jordan, Riverton, Harriman, and I'm missing one. Copperton, thank you. So they were all really great throughout this process. We had these 4 amazing meetings, first starting out with sort of a vision workshop, then moving into an existing challenges and opportunity workshop where we actually toured around the study area, moving into our 3rd meeting that really outlined the goals and strategies of the plan, all of this being very hands-on and cooperative even though we are across state lines, and then our final meeting looking into the implementation plan there. Through all of this, what we're seeing is these 5 themes that keep recurring through all of this engagement, that we want to protect water quality and the usage of water in this area. We want to preserve those plant and animal habitats. We want to recreate and access the waterways, but in a responsible way, increase community awareness and involvement, bring people into these waterway discussions. And then when we need to do development, because people still need a place to live, we do so responsibly. With that brings us to the goals for this plan, which is a very exciting sort of guiding part of this plan. There are 5 key goals here. The first one, we have consistently said, this is the big one. This is kind of the one that precedes everything else. This goes back to the aquifer recharge discussion. And this is where we want to, or the plan proposes to revitalize and embrace the natural water cycle, doing whatever we can to put water first and have everything kind of domino effect off of that. The second goal is prioritize preservation and enhance open space. This is where we're really looking into sort of the terrestrial component of the natural environment. Goal 3 is to provide access to waterway corridors for recreation and connectivity. This is when we start pulling in people and recreation into the study area. Goal 4 is to integrate natural systems into community and development, so having that coexistence between development and the environment. And then finally, goal 5 is to increase resiliency and climate adaptation for natural and urban conditions. So this is we're looking at those bigger systems of the environment and climate to really tie this all together. So that brings us to the strategies and actions. First, looking at that goal 1, that really water-focused goal. These are a few areas. We just want to highlight a couple of these strategies, and we'll have a link to the plan at the end. This is just like a taste of what's in this plan. But these ones focus on protecting water, aquifer recharge, if I haven't said that enough already, infiltration, water quality, and reducing runoff and evaporation. So in this map here, it's just some of the sort of sample implementation areas for some of these goals and strategies. Looking at ways to prevent water loss in our canals, increasing our groundwater infiltration in that primary recharge zone, and even looking at places like Butterfield Creek where the historic alignment of that creek has changed and how can we maybe go back to that in some capacity. We're also looking at one strategy that looks into enhancing and restoring natural stream channels. So in some areas where a lot of development has occurred, we're seeing a condition similar to this where the creek is forced to conform to the grids and things that we see in Utah development. But if we were to introduce meanders into these creeks and sort of restore them to a more natural condition, then we start to see just so many unfolding effects from that, including establishment of native plants, elimination of noxious weeds, improving that riparian zone, and then of course pollinators would benefit from that all as well. This also helps with infiltration, slowing the flow, and then therefore also reducing the effects of erosion. Like I mentioned, this is just a taste of these goals of these strategies. So these are just a few other sample strategies from the plan that really scratch the surface of ways that water can be managed in these creeks. Then moving into goal 2, which is prioritizing preservation and enhancing open space. This is where we start to look at natural areas, green spaces, and how we can enhance those systems. So like I mentioned earlier with those quarter-mile park service gaps, we also mapped out all the areas generally where we're seeing a little bit less service from parks in these pink areas. And those would be priority areas for implementing new green space, particularly related to the waterways. This also looks at establishing conservation areas, sort of that greenish gray along all the waterways, which can be for habitat, for just natural lands preservation, and really establishing those corridors as permanently protected areas. Speaking of native plants and noxious weeds, which has continually been a priority of this plan. So we're looking into ways to promote the revegetation of native and riparian species, sort of what you're seeing on the left. We want more of this and less of this. That taking out some of our invasives and noxious weeds, working with different agencies to make that happen. And that will just have a number of, again, cascading effects for water quality, habitat, and the overall experience on the waterways. More example strategies from the plan. If I haven't said noxious and invasive weeds enough yet, that's another really big one to highlight there. And then just things like education, showing people how important these strategies are and how important these waterways are, not just from a habitat perspective, but from sort of a cultural perspective as well. Getting into goal 3, this is where we look at recreation. This is a big highlight of this is that although we're proposing different recreation strategies, the priority through community engagement and with the team was responsible recreation, making sure that recreation is included in areas that prioritize the health of the waterways. So even some of these proposed locations where maybe access to the waterways would be smart, but making those limited and figuring out how we're doing those responsibly. And then a lot of the other strategies was just revolved around completing trail systems and using trails in an urban and in a natural setting for recreation or for commuting or for safe routes to school, things like that. Goal 4, this one was the community development goal. So we've sort of mapped out some of our recent development, some of our ones that we know are coming down the pipeline. And really this one's a bit more policy focused on how do we prioritize stewardship and different regulations with new development that don't prohibit development, but do it in a way that will serve the environment in our watershed. Looking into a few of these here, a lot of it's working with developers, creating new requirements for parks and open spaces and new developments, and just finding ways that all those things can kind of coexist. And finally, goal 5, which is our sustainability and climate adaptation goal. This one goes back again to the removing invasive plants, which we see sort of as important as the aquifer recharges. This is one that continually comes up. And then also, I know we've had some discussions today about E. coli and water quality. This is kind of where we start to look at some of those hazards as well. Additionally, some of the considerations of this part of the plan are fire breaks and erosion control and just different hazards that we can start to mitigate through waterway management. You're not supposed to be able to read this. This is just sort of the final step of this implementation where we're looking at by goal, priority, and geographically by which municipality they apply to, different action items that can be completed in the next 5 years. So we're really starting to look into, this isn't just a plan that sits on a shelf. This is something that we've worked through with our steering committee to make sure this is something real that can happen and we can start to see this implementation coming down the pipeline. Just to give you kind of a hopeful vision for the future maybe, we have a few of these images to wrap this up. Sort of thinking about what could an H2Oquirrh vision look like for this area, and we call this one the foothills vision. This is kind of up in those foothills where maybe recreation is more prevalent, introducing those meanders to slow the flow and increase that absorption and infiltration into the ground, allowing that natural runoff to be able to infiltrate, and then, but not making that so closed off to the public that we can't also have recreation still part of this, which also goes to that responsible development. All of these systems are coexisting to promote waterway quality, habitat restoration, and also bringing people closer to the waterways. And sort of farther down into the valley, looking at the urban water interface vision here, this is where we're starting to see a lot more of the integration of stewardship with waterways and future development, pulling in educational elements and just making this a place for people as much as it is for the natural environment, prioritizing native species and targeting that removal of noxious and invasive weeds, and then looking into other ways to connect people and connecting schools, all of those things coming together there. And with that, I will pass it to Jason to take us into the future.
All right, thanks for that. Yeah, with a few minutes here left in our time, I just wanted to talk a little bit about looking forward. So where can we head, and what are some of the strategies that we can kind of work together as a community? So right now, the draft is up on our project website. You can scan that code if you want to find out anything more about the project itself. Otherwise, you can search for H2Oquirrh, and it'll come up that way as well. We have a great story map up there where you can kind of interact with some of this data. There's some great drone footage as well of all of the creeks that you can get a better aerial view of the existing conditions. And then we also have an area where you can leave your comments. So we really want to hear your feedback and going forward, what we need to strategize and plan for first. With that, we can open up for any questions.
My question is about how you try to keep that open space for the natural model, the stream model, and if there's places already along the creek corridors where that is no longer possible. So it'll have to be a mixture of more impacted streams with a more meandering version. And then I think one of your steps said encourage leaving open space, but are there any policies besides like encouragement, or how would you go about that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So obviously this is one of the fastest growing areas in Salt Lake County, if not for all of Utah. So there is that strategy of trying to get ahead because we know one of the hardest things to do is create that open space, and I think the saying goes, the cheapest time to buy the land is now. So we are trying to get ahead with that. With that being said, we are working with the different municipalities and then also Camp Williams with compatible use as well. So we're looking at some new opportunities there to understand how conservation and open space can be a compatible use with the military around in that area as well. So opportunities there we're looking into.
Thank you all. I think this is really important work. My question has to do with land ownership in those headwaters of the Oquirrhs. I'm under the impression that most of that land is privately owned or owned by Kennecott or other stakeholders. So I'm wondering about preserving those spaces or opening them up to the public or for recreation or conservation. If you could just speak on that a little bit. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, thanks. It is a patchwork quilt of land ownership over there. Some of the bigger landowners obviously is Rio Tinto. And then as well as that, there is some public land as far as the BLM goes. Salt Lake County has recently bought quite a bit of open land over there along with Harriman and starting to develop some areas of recreation. There's some new mountain bike areas that have recently opened up. And a lot of that is actually on Rio Tinto leased land. So we are opening up those discussions with Rio Tinto, and they're starting to see the value of preserving some of those lands that have not been developed in the past.
I was just curious, like seeing on the map the extent of the mine, the changes in the hydrology, and during your research phase, what you found with that large of a mine in the headwaters area.
Yeah, that was interesting, and I think the mine mostly tries to manage their own water, and they try to not have any water run off into the streams. So like Bingham Creek used to have Bingham Canyon, and there's no water that comes into Bingham Creek anymore from Bingham Canyon. So I think the mine tries to contain their water that they get in their runoff, and they try to treat it on site, take care of it on site. They don't let any down into the streams. So that part of the watershed is gone right now, I guess. I think there are efforts to restore some places that they've disturbed. I don't know the extent of that. Jason might know more about that, but they're starting to think about restoring those slopes and areas where they've mined for a long, long time. So.
Yeah, it is a long-term discussion, and obviously a lot of those watersheds have been impaired to the extent of not sure anything we'll see in our lifetime, but we are trying to preserve what is left.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I'm curious, in your development of this plan, have you reached any sort of quantification of how much water you could see recharging these aquifers as a result of these changes?
Come to my talk tomorrow. Because we did a study of the stormwater in the Great Salt Lake Basin, so yeah, we'll have some more details about that tomorrow.
Sounds great, thanks.
Yeah.
That's a good plug for day 2 of the symposium. Thanks.
Hey, great job. I guess my question, so it's the southwest of the Oquirrhs, and we have lots of cool maps, and the kind of line between like Harriman, South Jordan, West Jordan, but like, is anyone doing this for like Taylorsville, West Valley, Magna, Kearns? Because it's really cool what y'all are doing down there, but you talk about like disparities of like green spaces, and then I look at West Valley and I'm like, there's nowhere to go. Really. There's the one Decker Lake we can go visit, and then there's the the corporate park, but you can't really go visit that as like a wetland. So like, question for everyone. Is there plug to who's doing stuff like this up there, or is there future projects where we could expand this to like the whole west side, or
Yeah, so I mean,
thoughts on that?
It's definitely been a discussion. I mean, as we start moving in closer, especially to the Great Salt Lake, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities there, and we start talking about the wetlands as well. So I could definitely see that as being a future project to spend a little more closer attention to.
Or like, you know, when we walk around and there's all the canals and it's like, no trespassing, and you're like, I guess I got to go to the east side then to go on a hike by a river. But it's cool that you guys are getting there. So.
That's great stuff. My name's Keith Lawrence. I work with the Division of Wildlife Resources in the Central Region with native species, native aquatic species. I love the vision of what you're doing. We've had discussions in the past in my office. Is like, does anybody really know what the state of those streams are on Southwest Oquirrhs? Is there potential to do some habitat restoration? I know there's always challenges. I see a lot of potential here. We probably have resources that might help you achieve some of the things that you're interested in, and then maybe some of the things that we're interested in too. And so if you have an interest in engaging on that sort of thing, we'd love to. So good work.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll just follow up with that. So I'm Keith's coworker in DWR in the Central Region. We've done some work in Yellow Fork. I think that's encompassed in this, and we've really been basically shut down because of water rights concerns. And so I don't know, have you guys looked into purchasing water rights or any of that?
Not as far as my office goes, but I know there's other discussions happening.
I have a question. So obviously you mentioned at the top that this is like the fastest growing portion of the county, and certainly I see that a lot with my work with the county. And perhaps this is early days still, but what have your discussions been like with like home builders and developers and because it seems like those are the people driving this, right? I mean, obviously the community's growing too, but getting them on board obviously is going to be key to this, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely. So we did have quite a few of the larger developers part of some of these workshops as well, and a lot of them are starting to see the value of having green space incorporated in some of their designs. And I don't know if you can touch on that a little bit more.
I can speak a little bit more generally. There's a lot of precedent for different benefits that can be provided to developers for providing green space. So it's sort of a framework that's established as something that's worked well in the past, particularly for LID, for different parks and open spaces. The plan also looked into allocating water rights through new development that, I can't remember the exact wording in the plan, but that was something that we looked into as things are getting developed. Can we kind of sort of catch things before something goes in the ground and anticipate what the needs of the watershed will be from this new development. So I think LID was kind of the biggest focus of that, but just knowing that there's a lot of other cities and municipalities who have done something similar to make sure that everybody kind of gets something that works well for them, and it's not just sort of meaningless exchanges of benefits. It's really thought out things that will benefit everybody. And of course, property value and green space are really tied together, especially recently. So that's another one that really benefits developers anyway from providing those amenities to people.
Thank you. And if there's no more questions, I think that's it. So give a round of applause for our presenters.